Alexander Heffner, your host on The Open Mind. In our politics, and perhaps too frequently in our national discourse, incivility still bears its ugly head. For this reason, we may often find ourselves craving an infusion of good humor, insights that transcend the day-to-day news cycles, uplift our spirits, and force us to embrace our collective humanity. I could not dream of a more fitting or charismatic person to deliver such a message than today's guest. Author of the New York Times best-selling memoir, How to Be Black, Baratunde Thurston is a comic genius for sure, an internet trailblazer and prolific speaker about identity in the American experience. As digital director of the Onion newspaper, Thurston brought satirical fake news into the modern age. He has since founded Cultivating, a creative design consultancy that combines humor and technology to, quote, bring to life great ideas. Younger people, not only 20-somethings, but those in their 30s and 40s, can attribute their news literacy to the comedy of Baratunde Thurston and to those in his company, the Stephen Colberts and Bill Maher's of the media scene. At the backbone of his humor, Thurston's book and other writings acutely, and always hilariously, reveal his desire to be a catalyst for positive change. So I want to first ask the self-described hashtagger-in-chief how to cultivate wit that is sound both for the mind, but also sound for the health of a society.
Goodness. Wow. Amazing intro. High bar. Hello, Alexander.
Hello, Baratunde.
Man, comic genius. Colbert's in my company. What? Okay, wow. Thank you.
It's true.
That's ridiculous, but I appreciate it. I really do. So yeah, what's the question?
To cultivate wit
Yeah.
that sound not only for the individual's experience on the tube, but for a society. And how do you walk that balance?
Man, I try not to think about it like that. To begin with, if every statement is put through the filter of how will this help society,
But you are a philosopher.
I did major in philosophy in college. I have a degree in it. I guess I'm a practitioner of it by virtue of that piece of paper. And, you know, I've always cared about current events and news. I've been politically active and campaigned on people's behalf where I used to live in Massachusetts and where I still live now in America in terms of on behalf of President Obama and other local politicians here in New York City. So my range of concern is beyond just the laugh, that's for sure. So what I am sometimes trying to do, though not all the time, sometimes I'm just being silly. I don't want people to think like I have a lofty goal with every tweet, because they will be severely underwhelmed. Like, how does this help America? It doesn't. It's just me being a weirdo. But where I try to make that mix work is to bring my point of view and to bring some levity to the awkwardness. So the book is maybe the longest example of this, where you're talking about racism and people's offendedness and defensiveness around this topic. And I try to use my own life in a humorous way to like talk about the awkwardness of being the only black kid in a school environment or growing up in DC at a time when it was ravaged by crack wars. Like, that's not all necessarily hilarious, but there's a take to be had on it that allows more of a conversation to happen than just preaching like I'm doing right now, very unhilariously. Yeah.
No, very hilariously as well.
So yeah.
So to cultivate wit, though, in having a backbone that deliberately attempts to be pro-social rather than anti-social, how do you craft that message?
Practice. I mean, I don't know of a formula which says, oh, you have 3 parts research and 2.5 units of self-righteousness plus 7 quadrangles of levity equals, amazing joke that also makes a point. I started writing humorously my freshman year in college. And it was a satirical newsletter that I put together just for my friends, for our email mailing list. But it was born out of a take on what was happening in the world that I thought was just more honest. So in some ways, what I'm trying to do is just tell it like it is. Like, we have this whole scandal right now with the returned prisoner of war from Afghanistan. And it's become somehow acceptable on the right side of the media to imply, not even imply, to claim that like not every service member is worth bringing home. And we have to do some kind of math to figure out, well, if they deserted, then we should leave them. If 3 people die trying to rescue them, then the cost benefit of human life. It's like, no, you don't. Do you get to do that? Like, does everybody who was brought home get retroactively put through some ringer? Do we send people back? Do we send John McCain back to Vietnam because, well, it turns out the mechanical failure on his plane, he didn't maintain his plane right, so he has to go back to the Viet Cong? Like, it's a ridiculous line of logic that, absurdly applied, reveals that it's not a road that we should be pursuing. So that's just an off-the-cuff, example. I'm not even sure it's a great one, but how I try to approach some of these issues. Because the anger is easy. It comes in a flash. And so an attempt to translate that into something that more people would listen to is sometimes the goal.
Do you think that comes from a skewed worldview?
I have a heavily skewed worldview.
But I mean the folks who would criticize. I don't mean you're.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm super.
And
my worldview
to the extent that's skewed.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know what an unskewed worldview would be. I think we all have a skew to our worldview. Hopefully we have a common enough view that we can coexist peacefully as a society, and we have a balance of skew, which leads to something productive. I have a worldview that skews heavily to the left in many things. There are people who have a worldview that skews heavily to the right, and that's just one filter on it. There's all kinds of angles you could take on the world. So my skew is toward revealing contradiction and absurdity and ridiculousness. Someone else's may be skewed toward a religious interpretation from whether it's the Bible or the Quran, and how we meet is the fun part and sometimes the infuriating part. Yeah.
I mention your comic contemporaries because you have such a decisive role in our democracy, especially in this contemporary age. I want to ask you, do you think that today's comedian has become more explicitly this kind of irreplaceable antidote to all that ails society?
I love the idea that what I've chosen to do with my life is describable as irreplaceable. In the age of outsourcing and machines taking our jobs, I feel secure in my future when you call what I do irreplaceable. I think.
But is that fair?
From my skewed perspective, absolutely. Comedy can be a great translator of the truth and of reality and of a way to testify to what's actually happening and like why it's important or why it's wrong. And there's a way we listen to like what comedy does is it has a passive impact on us, a subconscious impact. Because you make somebody laugh, you're kind of messing with their head. You're getting them to agree with you without saying, do you agree with me? Laughter is a sign of agreement because they've kind of come around to your skewed worldview. And the laugh is a symbol of like, yes, I'm with you, at least for that line, for that moment. And Bill Maher is very funny. I don't agree with everything he says, certainly about religion and Islam, but he's funny and he's clearly really smart. So I think in an age where the media is heavily fragmented and been forced to be a profit-making enterprise, and it's so fragmented, in an age where our politicians are bought explicitly by massive interest, and in an age where we can seek out opinions that we already pre-align with, the comedian has an important role to play in trying to cut across some of those lines.
And how do you transcend that spontaneous, immediate reaction into something deeper from the listener?
Whew, I think you're giving us a lot of credit, and I appreciate it. I do. It's like an honor, but sometimes you don't. First of all, it doesn't happen every time, and sometimes you stumble your way into it, and you just have a moment. Like you look at every single sketch, or monologue, or bit from The Daily Show, and they don't all land super hard. Some of them are just flippant. Some of them are kind of dumb. They're funny, but they're just kind of silly. And then there's every once in a while, but a pretty regular clip, or The Onion, or Colbert, or any kind of outlet like that, you're like, oh. And I think part of how you do it is to constantly be doing it. And you just swing a lot. I don't actually like baseball at all, but you take a lot of, is it called at-bats? See, I'm a sportsman. I make sports metaphor. There you go. Real American, yeah.
Well, I wonder because studies do show again and again that it is you and Stephen Colbert and this comedic cohort who are most swaying young people, but even Americans as a whole.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
I feel terrified by the prospect of the responsibility that comes with that, and I'm not.
But you accept that responsibility.
I mean, I guess I accept it by my actions because I keep doing it. So if that's acceptance, then yes, I accept. I'm not a full-on journalist. I did work in my college newspaper. I worked over summers at the Washington Post in the mailroom and the copy aid station. And I blogged politically for a long time, and I've hosted shows. I have journalistic tendencies. I'm not a full-on journalist. But yeah, I think there's the artist, even beyond comedy, has always played this role. Painters and sculptors and poets are reinterpreting reality for us and showing us who we are through their art rather than through like a political speech or a philosophical tome or a religious text. So this is a consistent theme. I think we have a accelerated growth of this because of technology, because more people are speaking, and because we have so many choices for where we get our information that who we trust is harder. So yeah, I think there's something special about the comic. Again, selfishly assumed.
You take issue with this idea of post-racial, which I think you would agree was a false promise of the Obama presidency.
Oh yeah, it was a lovely idea to be like, oh, we're over it. You got your black president. Let's move on to the next major social flaw in our democracy. And so post-racial, nice sounding word. Post anything, like post-apocalyptic. Even that sounds great. It's terrible, but it sounds nice. It like resonates off your tongue. So yeah, post-racial was a quaint notion that with the election of Barack Obama, we had resolved all of our racialized history, and that's not the
But post-racist is important.
Yeah, now that's not a term I've heard a lot of people use. It is important to try to get there. I think even post implies like we're skipping. It's almost like it needs an adverb in front of it, like exhaustedly, just barely across the line-edly post-racist, because there's work to be done. And so
And it sounds like a lot of work.
yeah, the linguistic twist of saying post anything, it's like, oh, I'm post-caloric. I don't need food anymore. Yeah, it doesn't work that way. Yeah. I'm post-obese. I don't have to work out. Like, I'm post-shame. I never have any doubts about my place in the world. I'm post-ego, totally humble. So saying it doesn't quite make it so. We got to do the work.
I want to read an excerpt from a recent Politico story, and I want to ask the author of How to Be Black his reaction.
Hope we can find it.
The story was the Obama paradox. The president finally is much freer to talk about things that matter to him. He discusses issues of race in a far more personal way, more frequently than he ever did in his first term. He is more prone to speak his mind on contentious social issues, to the point of volunteering that in his younger days, quote, I got high. So is this an accurate reading in your estimation, Baratunde Thurston, or a miscalculation of how to view President Obama's blackness?
So I have a whole chapter in this book called How to Be the Next Black President. Next is in parentheses. And I basically dissect his first term for hints about how someone else who wants to hold this office would have to chart their course, a lot of which is being racial, right, just by being brown, but not talking about it because it makes America uncomfortable to kind of look back at that history. And I do see some more openness on his part. He's got his My Brother's Keeper initiative, which is coming right out of the White House, all up focusing on the plight of black men in this country who, if you just look at that demographic, a lot of challenge, heavy incarceration rate, put on by policies of another Democratic president, so not everything cuts so easily left and right and Democratic and Republican when you look at the impact of these policies and the people who vote for that particular party. So there is a lot of truth to that Politico statement, and it also just makes sense. Every second-term president, especially in the last 2 years, starts to just pull out the stops. Like George W. Bush is like, I want to do away with Social Security. Like he could never have gotten reelected with the voting populace of elderly people saying, I want to put all your Social Security in the stock market, and then look what happened to that. So I'm not saying Obama is talking about race as equivalent to privatizing Social Security. I am saying that presidents in their second term have a history of letting a little loose. And if he does a press conference with a flask, I wouldn't be surprised. I think it'd be nice to see him let his proverbial hair down a little bit. It's certainly gotten grayer. So I take a little issue with the idea that he is, talking about his drug use. Like he campaigned around that too. And I think we're at a generational split where this pretense of perfection is waning. And we actually want more authentic political leaders. And someone who is painted as this flawless hero, it's a risk because we know they're not. So I hope that's more of a trend for future politicians, that we don't put them so much on a pedestal that we, get so excited and force their decline and also have just outsized expectations of what one person can do.
We've been talking about skew, and I ask you about this particular excerpt from this Politico story because it seems to provide a prism that may not really speak to the heart of what people of color experience. I got high, is that not, I don't want to say offensive, but to look at issues of race through that prism exclusively?
Yeah.
Is that too much a dominant feature of today's coverage of race relations?
There is a lazy coverage of race relations by, I guess you can call it mainstream media. I don't want to sound like Sarah Palin here in lamestream media, but there's something to the idea that the people designated to kind of moderate our national discourse aren't necessarily equipped. And you saw it in the first round of campaigning that Obama did, where it's like, oh, he's super black, like he's a militant. Like this guy who graduated from the University of Chicago, which has a pretty conservative view on economic policy, is somehow a revolutionary. And the guy who has the heavy funding from Wall Street, the most in the history of any president, is somehow a socialist. And there is a racialized like othering of this dude, just like he's not one of us. Even if you look at the POW thing, it's like, how do we make returning a POW somehow un-American? Because it's this guy. Now some of it's just politics. And I think we all seek to vilify our political opponents, and Bill Clinton certainly got a lot of it, and he's not a black dude. But he was a left guy who was the first black president, and his affinity for the African-American population, I think just rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. So yeah, painting him talking about race in the same sentence as him smoking up or getting high is just a lazy association that fits in a world where, oh yeah, black people, they're the drug dealers, right? Yeah.
So when did Barack Obama, in your estimation, earn the bona fides, if you will, of the black community by virtue of substantive policy reform?
In some ways, he's still got more work to do. And I think—
Which ways?
Well, the My Brother's Keeper gets at it, and what Eric Holder's trying to do with the retroactive sentencing around the drug policy and incarceration is a step in a great direction. But the wholesale abandonment of economic potential and familial units in the form of mass incarceration of people who look like me is a devastating policy. And it's not something he ran on. It's not something that he was like doing a lot in the first term, and I'm happy to see some of that start, but there's so much more work to be done in that area. The healthcare reform bill, he has this universalism approach to problems that affect the black community. Because I think he knows, like, this country would freak out. Look at what they've already freaked out about, returning a prisoner. Imagine if he just said, I want to do this for black people. They would be like, off with his head, let's have a recall. They would create a whole new way of impeachment and call it something else. So he's understandably reticent to like face that head on. But that said, you only get one shot at this job. And now that you signed up for it. So I got a bit of sympathy, but also a bit of hope to pursue a little more aggressively while he still can in that particular bully pulpit as much as is possible.
From what you said, it sounded like we're very far from post-racist.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, look, we got a couple 100 years of work, and I want people to understand, I don't think one 8-year term of one dude, I don't think a great conversation between me and you or 100 others like this is what it's gonna take. I think, you look at the generations of cultural impression that we have all forced on each other and accepted, the idea that subconsciously, I'm not even a human being. When you look at how police treat black and brown men and the level of brutality in equal situations that is visited upon us. When you look at the destruction of a family unit over and over and over again, migration, like there's so many deeper like post-traumatic stress sort of things that we all have to get through. I'm not just talking about reparations as an argument for black people. I'm talking about a whole country whose economic history is grounded in a lot of racial discrimination. That doesn't get done on a scale of years or decades. I think it gets done on a scale of like a century, if we're lucky.
What's the best hope to expedite the process? I mean, other than jumping in a time machine.
Oh, creating new people. Yeah, I guess unprotected sex, right? We need more human beings born of this time. And I think a lot of it is the natural turnover of us. And people born into this time, born into a world that's more global, born into an internet culture that's less top down from a media and cultural perspective, where you can fashion yourself without the burden of the people who came before you quite as much. At least that's more possible. That's great. And the more we have people crafting that identity and promoting it without asking permission, like, is this black? Is this American? Is this blah, blah, blah? There's a great hope for that. Plus, I think there's a hope in some of the disasters that we're facing. I mean, alien invasion would be great. It would kind of unify us all. But we have some forms of that in the melting planet and the rising seas. And we face some challenges so big from a nationalistic perspective, here comes China, to a global perspective, here comes the ocean, that we need all hands kind of working together. So I think there is some survival demand that's driven and some economic opportunity that could force us to move a little more quickly than we have so far.
What do you think the public response would be if Barack Obama advocated procreation for social justice?
I think the Pope would love it, right? The evangelicals, like anyone in a religious base, Italians, they would love it.
It strikes me that more people than not may love it.
Yeah. No,
it strikes a religious chord.
Plus, you could position it as like, look, China's got 1 billion people. We only got 300 million something. We got to catch up. Let's go, America. Their one-child policy plus unprotected success here at home, that's an America we can believe in.
Is that the next 2016 campaign slogan for Hillary Clinton?
I would love to see that. Just
transmit that.
For my life as a comedian. Yeah.
Transmit that. You said recently, sometimes the angry black person needs to say, that's racist. He won't pull any punches, and sometimes America needs a punch. So I want to ask you, between the problems you allude to in our criminal justice system and the political ones we face, who or what in America is most gravely in need of a punch?
I mean, so many. Gravely, maybe, I want to say Congress to some degree, because, but it might be more systemic than that. I mean, I think Congress is a part of the problem. They're also a symptom of the system we've set up. So we have real challenges that, energy and how that's made, food and like the heavy sugar, corn, all that nonsense adds up. Like the food that is in our kids' schools, which is garbage, which is like heavily financed by the snack lobby. Like there's something called the snack lobby, and they're getting Domino's pizza as the meal of the day in our schools. You think that doesn't affect how kids learn, how their minds work, the level of aggression? Like this, all is connected. And I feel like we have a major block on even having that conversation, because those people also have bought a big chunk of the political process. So if on the spot I'm forced to pick one institution or party that is most in need of a punch, I would say not just the members of Congress, but the system of it, the financing of it, the way the districts are drawn. That skews our perspective and it limits our choices, right? It limits the arguments we are able to have. Healthcare should have been an argument between a fully public funded European style thing and like fend for yourself, tax breaks, good luck out there. And instead we had a fend for yourself tax break versus like put everybody into the private market. And we ended up arguing about death panels and Obama's coming for your grandma, because this position of a public option wasn't politically acceptable because of the money and the lines that are drawn. So I think our system of representation, the funding of that system and the way those lines are drawn has so skewed the acceptable discourse that it prevents us from seeing the wealth of options that we have available.
Our alma mater runs a course for newly elected congressional officials.
You're being real vague.
Harvard, right? Kennedy School specifically.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you, when are you going to bring your comedic tutorial to lighten the mood in Congress? Because that might help things.
I mean, whenever I see somebody speaking in Congress, no one's watching. You see these moments on C-SPAN where people are just kind of speaking to dead air, so I'm not sure that's the most effective way. I don't know how you...
In the training process...
Yeah, maybe like going to the kid, like,
So I'm going to suggest that.
Take unprotected sex and like the next generation of politicians plus comedic lesson planning. Maybe there is some kind of like online course that we can offer.
If comedy is the antidote, then you're it.
Yeah.
And I have to say, we've run out of time.
Well, thanks for the time that we've had. This has been great, man.
I want to thank you, Baratunde Thurston.
Thanks, Alexander.
And thanks to you in the audience. I hope you join us again next time for a thoughtful excursion into the world of ideas. Until then, keep an open mind. Please visit the Open Mind website at 13.org/openmind to view this program online or to access over 1,500 other Open Mind interviews.